Thank you for joining us today for our discussion of how we deliver on biomanufacturing's full potential. My name is Megan Palmer. I am currently the Executive Director of Biopolicy and Leadership Initiatives at Stanford University, and I'm an adjunct professor in our Department of Bioengineering. So how we reliably make all of the things that we rely upon for healthy and secure societies, and how we do that sustainably, is a massive challenge that's been discussed throughout our days here in Davos. But what perhaps is less appreciated is that until fairly recently, we did not have the tools to fully leverage the most advanced and fundamentally sustainable manufacturing platform on the planet that made us and nearly everything around us, biology. Innovations in synthetic biology have made foundational tools for working with biological systems like the reading, writing, editing, and evolving of DNA and the functions that come from it much easier and cheaper. And so we're beginning to be able to approach biology as a fundamentally more predictable and programmable technology. And so there's a lot of value that can be unlocked in this bio-revolution. And there's been studies recently, including from McKinsey, that have talked about the economic benefits being around $4 trillion per year over the next 10 to 20 years, and touching a wide array of sectors from health and manufacturing to the environment and more. And so it's no surprise that the broader manufacturing community is looking to biology for solutions that are more sustainable than many of our current practices. But to really be unlocking this full potential, public and private sector leaders are going to need to partner with each other so that they can partner effectively with biology. So we're going to be discussing today how biomanufacturing is transforming business, how it contributes to a bioeconomy with benefits to companies and customers and the environment. And I should mention that today's session is also being informed by a recent white paper on accelerating the biomanufacturing revolution that you can read about with the forum. And so we have a really exceptional panel today joining us. I'm really excited for a lively discussion, so thank you all. So first, we have Trish Malarkey, who's the Chief Innovation Officer of Royal DSM, where she shapes DSM's long-term innovation strategy. Thank you so much for being with us. We have Rick Fulop, who's the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Desktop Metal, which is accelerating the transformation of manufacturing with end-to-end 3D printing solutions. And I think was it 2021 that you launched Desktop Health?
Correct, yeah.
That's right, looking at advances in biofabrication solutions. Then Jason Kelly, co-founder and chief executive officer of Ginkgo Bioworks, which is a leading synthetic biology company that's been designing made-to-order microbes across a wide range of industries. And last but certainly not least, Trevor Martin, who's co-founder and CEO of Mammoth Biosciences, which is harnessing new gene editing tools like CRISPR for therapeutics and diagnostics. So thank you so much for joining us today. If you're joining us online today, please use the hashtag WEF22 to share your insights. I'm going to go through three main themes today. The first is present realities. What can we do today and what are the challenges? We'll talk a little bit about the potential. And then last, what types of partnerships. So let's get started. Trish, I'd like to start with you. So Royal DSM has quite an expansive portfolio. Yeah. So as the Chief Innovation Officer, can you tell me more about really what's being done today? Where do you see the most promising benefits of biomanufacturing? And what are the roadblocks that we're facing?
Thanks, Megan. So we're probably at one of the most exciting times in technology. We've had a number of discussions actually this week in thinking about, biology, biotech's been around for a while, but what makes things possible now is this awesome opportunity to put together our understanding of chemistry, our understanding of biology together now with the mathematics of digital and really precisely manufacture things. So the way I see it is we're really able to start copying nature. Nature has been able to do a lot of things that humans couldn't do. And now with our understanding via digital tools, we're really able to understand now how nature does what it does. And so the opportunity for DSM is to start to copy nature. And we copy nature in terms of using algae to produce omega-3 oils, for example. We're looking at how can we produce vitamin A by a bio route instead of a chemical route. So all of these are now opportunities because we really understand how to copy nature. So I'm excited about that.
Fantastic. Well, maybe Rick, I'll go to you next. Can you tell me a little bit more, leading in advanced manufacturing in general, and then this pivot towards really appreciating what can be done with bio. What are you seeing as the opportunities there?
Yeah, Desktop Metal is the leader in mass production using additive manufacturing, which is also known as 3D printing. And last year, roughly a year and a half ago, we started our healthcare business. This year, out of 260 plus million that we'll do as a company, about 90 will be in healthcare. So it's a pretty fast growing business for us. And it plays in a couple of segments, class 2 parts that are printed. These are devices that go and are permanently in your body, and all sorts of components. And the part that is related to bio is now you can make these devices resorb, or basically turn into tissue. And that's an exciting area in field. We acquired a company out of Harvard called Beacon Bio that's developing an eardrum repair technology. And this market is similar to what you would call it's a pretty broad market. We have about 1,500 papers, peer-reviewed, published with this bioplotter technology that we use in this space. It could be used for lots of things. If you think of autonomous driving and you have 4 or 5 levels, same thing can apply to biofabrication, because you could be using it to make an assay to test a drug. You could be using it to put something in the body that turns into cartilage, or a meniscus, or to make, let's say, a cornea that's artificial for a person. Or you could go 2 levels up and make an organoid that in the body turns into an organ. Or there's some of our customers are trying to print organs, and I think that's a little bit further out. But in the category 2, I think there's a huge market, and we sell. I mean, the world makes $80 billion worth of implants a year, and $30 billion worth of dental restorative components, and printing can play a huge role in those markets, transforming them into better patient outcomes.
Fantastic. So we're already starting to see the diversity of different approaches and different sectors. Maybe Jason, you can tell me a little bit more about developing new business models and new capabilities across a wide array of industries. Where are you seeing the most promising applications right now, and where are the areas where we're still not seeing the full potential realized?
Yeah, so I'd start by saying I think the fact that the manufacturing sector and sort of the World Economic Forum is acknowledging biomanufacturing, this is the way to think about it is, manufacturing, typically people think of cars or think of microprocessor chips or things like that. And when they think of biology, they tend to think of therapeutic drugs, right? Or maybe food. But really what's happening is there's new technology called synthetic biology, which is basically allowing us to program DNA, kind of like you'd program a computer, right? So you're putting in new DNA code to make a cell do something new. And the cost to do that is falling dramatically, which we can talk about. And it's opening up, like Trish was mentioning, I think a moment to really think of biology as a generic manufacturing platform, not just to make therapeutics, but really ultimately to make anything made of atoms, right? Because if you go out and look at biology fundamentally and look inside a leaf, on a plant, you're going to see atomic structures that rival what we can do with semiconductor manufacturing. But today, our ability to program that technology to make what we want is limited, but it's getting better every year. And so I do think this is the right time for the forum to be thinking of biomanufacturing, particularly in an era of wanting to improve sustainability and improve greenhouse gas emissions, which we can talk about. This is, to me, the manufacturing technology ultimately for physical goods in the future. So excited to talk and get in on details.
Fantastic. Well, even though we're talking about it being far beyond health these days, there's still a lot of innovation to do in the health setting, as well as a lot of lessons learned from what's possible and what's challenging. So
I knew Trevor would take all the pharma stuff, so I wanted to take everything else.
So can you tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing in terms of the manufacturing potential? What's changing right now, and what's still challenging?
Yeah, I mean, to build on what Jason was saying, there's this adage in Silicon Valley that software is eating the world, but I think everyone on this panel would agree that's, an appetizer, if anything. I mean, biology is the code of life, right? Like, we're all made of cells that have DNA, and really our ability to change the code of life and to edit it with tools like CRISPR, which, to your point, is actually co-opted from nature itself. I find that so beautiful, that the way that we're actually going to be able to harness nature to solve a lot of these big problems and to build a lot of great drugs is actually through a tool that's kind of this adaptive immunity of microbes, right? I think that's just so beautiful that we're actually able to take that tool and then use it, and it's a testament to human ingenuity. So I think that's one of these really exciting advancements where not only can we read DNA really well through things like sequencing, we can write it really well and increasingly better, but we can also edit and actually change DNA in cells. So I think that's super transformative, of course, in the areas that we focus on, like in healthcare in terms of therapeutics and diagnostics. I think there's obviously huge things to discuss there in terms of manufacturing, like how do we make cell and gene therapies something that can be worldwide and not just in the developed world, right? That's a big manufacturing challenge, and I think there's a lot of exciting potential solutions, but that's going to be like a key part of that industry. So I think it really is this idea of how do we leverage the diversity of life to build these amazing new tools that will allow us to then harness nature itself to solve the problems that we're talking about at the World Economic Forum.
Well, let's start off with some of this. We're seeing these new tools and technologies being able to be harnessed to sort of decrease costs, potentially enable new types of functions, but ultimately we have to figure out how do we do them in a sort of cost competitive way and able to get the scale and the intersection with all these different industries. And so I was hoping that anyone here who wants to start could tell me a little bit more about what's the on the ground reality right now about what we can do effectively and where do we need to be to actually unlock this true potential.
Maybe just I'll start, if that's okay. I mean, I was thinking about this, if you think about something that I just mentioned, like the fish oil. So the technology is possible to produce. And I think one of the things with a lot of innovations is that you have to actually create a new value chain. Because although we all, there's a value chain for fish oil, but for us to actually create a value chain for bioproduced fish oil, you have to be able to balance the cost of investment to get into the whole area, the cost of scaling. You have to have the consumers, the retailers have a way of pulling the demand for that. And it really has to really think about how do you create and shape the value chain. And we need to think, one of my colleagues talks about it, we always have to think with the end in mind. And by the end in mind, I mean, who will actually want to pay for and buy the value that a sustainably produced fish oil is better than one that is produced by farming the sea. So it's really, in my view, scaling isn't about just getting the technology to get the enzymes producing more, to get the strains producing more. It's actually about the end-to-end value chain as a thought.
Maybe, Jason, can I get you to build on this a little bit? As somebody who's working at a company that is touching so many different potential value chains, how do you approach thinking about what's possible now and what the role is of different types of firms in this space?
Sure. Yeah. So at Ginkgo, we operate sort of like an Amazon Web Services for synthetic biology, right? So if you were a company in the space and you wanted to leverage, a designed cell, an engineered cell to do something new, whether that's to make a renewable chemical, we work with Roche and Biogen and things like cell and gene therapy areas for health. We also work with Bayer and engineering microbes for fertilizer production. So the idea is common platform that's improving to apply to many different applications. I would say two big buckets. I think if you look at the history of pharmaceuticals, it's a good indicator. The beginning of recombinant DNA in 1978 when it was discovered, Nobel Prize, founding of Genentech. The first applications were all replacements for existing things. So you had insulin that used to be extracted from pigs, and we took the gene, not us, Genentech, took the gene for insulin and put it into E. coli and brewed it up and produced human insulin. And so suddenly you had a replacement product. And I think that's a lot of what you're seeing now. Oh, we get fish oil this way. Could we get it more sustainably? Right, well, there's an existing market, so that's just a cost game, and it has some features like human insulin. Was that a safer product than pig insulin? And now look at where therapeutics is, right? So now, we have things like monoclonal antibodies. For cancer treatments, we have things like CRISPR. We have things like mRNA vaccines. It's all novelty that ultimately drew the true value out of the technology. And this was back when, this is the technology of cutting and pasting DNA largely, not what we're seeing today with editing and synthesis. And so my view is in the near term, I think it's replacement, and we have to fight these battles of cost. The long term, it's unlocking the magic of biology and all the things it could do that we just can't even imagine today. And you see hints of that. You see it in things like animal-free meats. You see it in some of the climate-related applications. But I think it's very early days, I think, for the technology. So my bet is on the new applications ultimately.
And Rick, maybe you can build a little bit on this, entering
Absolutely.
into a new area, seeing bio's potential. How are you thinking about the overall trajectory?
Absolutely. I think, well, look, biofabrication now has been in labs at universities for probably a decade and a half, and now it's finally starting to come out and being used in real clinical trials, and there's a number of products that will be available that for the first time use this technology. I think the part that's most exciting is that we now have ways to program the material properties that you want in a part that's going to go in the body. That part's going to turn into tissue or turn into cartilage, and you can program in the printed part what you want that to become when it goes in the body, which I find completely incredible. There's a professor called Ramil Shah at Northwestern that's one of our customers. They do a lot of research. She's printing ovaries as an organoid, get implanted currently in the animal trials. The mice that the implants go into turn those into a full ovary, and then those mice can reproduce. Think about and we have customers that are doing this across so many applications that are absolutely incredible, from helping people with their that need a cornea replacement down to people that need cartilage replacements, or United Therapeutics is trying to do a printed lung. Those are sort of the more futuristic applications. In the here and there's huge business in grafts, in plastic surgery. We have one application in printed eardrums that operate within the frequency of a human ear, that are fully printed, which are an incredible technology, and it's gone quite well on the animal side. So it's very frontier-like, and it affects all of medicine and how we do it today. You ideally want the body to heal itself, so it's kind of merging tissue engineering, which has been around for a while, with actual 3D parts, and that's something that didn't exist before. And it's not where we started our company. We do metal parts for cars and trains and airplanes, but for us, being in Boston, where there's a lot of bio-related technology, it's an exciting field to be in, and I think it's great to see all of our customers do incredible innovation in this field. I think, look back a decade from now, and this is going to be a major market.
Yeah. What astonishes me is just the different scales of complexity that we can harness with using biological systems, from the very simple to the very complex. And could I just ask you to build upon this a little bit, right? You've been having experience with sort of even some of the most arguably somewhat more simple than printing an organ, right? An effective diagnostic that we can produce at scale, or new therapies coming from these new tools. What have been some of your lessons learned in trying to bring some of these innovations to the market?
Yeah, well, I think the lessons I've definitely tried to learn from history in this space is, you said the right word, scale, right? In all senses of the word. So when you're trying to scale up, the biomanufacturing process, when you're trying to scale things like, cell and gene therapies, right? And this whole idea of could you have some massive scale manufacturing of it that would lower the cost, that would then be useful for many different patients? Or do you have to customize these for every patient? So there's very different models and very different cost structures. And I think in general, especially thinking about, going into the body and in vivo, some of the things we're excited about, how do you actually scale these delivery methods, whether that's AAV or LNPs, different ways of getting these technologies where they need to go. And I think the vaccines have been an amazing example of us being able to scale, right? But it was really hard, and it's like heroic what was done. And how do we, going forward, that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? In terms of what we need in terms of manufacturing. And it took so much time and effort to get here, and what can we learn from that? And how can we continue to invest in that? because this isn't, the pandemic was an amazing showcase of the power of biotechnology and the importance of manufacturing for it. But this is just one example of hundreds where hopefully it won't be such an emergency, but where it'd be really transformative to our lives. And I think it'll be things we won't expect.
Well, let's use that again as our starting point, right? If we think about the scale of the challenge here, of all of the things that biology could potentially help us do, that we're manufacturing as a challenge, like what do we need really to achieve this potential? What sort of ambitions do we need to be setting in order to build the infrastructure and the business models to support this ecosystem? Do you have any great ideas?
I think it's really interesting what Trevor said about, because it illustrates necessity is the mother of invention almost. I mean, we have these technologies, right, and they're all at the phase of really blossoming. And what, the RNAi vaccines is a classic example of where the necessity really brought the demand and the commitment. Now, we don't always want to have to react to crisis, but I think we're in another part of a crisis. We look at the need to get to net zero. We look at the need to produce food more sustainably, and I think these create the right conditions now for us to for our innovations to actually get traction, for people to take the risk, for partners to create the value chains, to pull the demand. And I think, proteins as a space, look at our ability, single cell proteins as an example, it's old technology. It's as old as the Second World War. But what makes it maybe the time being right for it now is the fact that we now have better carbon capture. So could we put an old technology together with our ability to capture carbon and create proteins out of it? Now, these are all possibilities. These are all possible now. So it's an exciting time for us, I think.
So if we begin to run that forward and okay, let's harness these carbon capture technologies across a wide range of manufacturing capacities, we also start to run into a few scenarios of the things that we're missing, whether it's the sort of infrastructure to scale up or the people that we need to support the workforce of the future to be able to innovate and scale and sustain. How do we think about setting those trajectories?
I mean, I can comment a little on this. It's sort of interesting to me, right? We think about this a lot in the U.S., right? So we have sort of a lot of advanced technology development happening on the coast in the U.S. and much consternation about sort of jobs throughout the Midwest and so on. And look, the design of plants and microbes, I think it's going to flow around big university centers, it'll be high technology and so on. The production of biology is growing things.
Yeah.
Right, it's farming, it's fermentation, right? Like we do a lot of brewing in St. Louis, right? Those technologies and that workforce. Like part of the challenge, like why is farming a tough business? The product's not changing, right? Like you're still selling an ear of corn, right? And everyone just expects it to get less expensive. They're not seeing innovation at the level of the product. Well, if you start to be able to use that same infrastructure to produce more valuable things, to use the intrinsic power of a plant to produce, essentially functioning nanotechnology, you start to increase the value of the product, and those are great jobs all of a sudden, right? And if you look across globally, I heard the statistic here, so I'll quote it, but it was like 30 or 40% of jobs are agriculture related globally. So all of those could become better jobs, right? If the value of what's coming out of land fundamentally is reimagined, right? And so, synthetic biology, I mean, this is a long road to get there, but I do think it's a complicated question. Like when people say they're usually talking about some of the advanced manufacturing or making a cell therapy, to me, the jobs are farming, right? And it's just a new thing you're producing.
Well, there's a lot of challenges here. We'll open up this to questions in a couple minutes if you have questions from the audience as well. But let's dig a little bit deeper here into exactly what we need. What are the types of partnerships, right? We're talking about a lot of large industries, some of which are very familiar with biology, right, in agriculture and in healthcare, and some that are really not. And so, we're here at the forum thinking about the types of exchanges between groups. What are the types of partnerships that you've made, and what would you like to see?
I think, at least in the biofabrication space, where you're making parts that turn into tissue or organs or
You're going to say
components in
parts
your
of
body.
people. I know you're
Well,
about to
yeah.
say. You know what?
That's true. The one part that's missing for us is a regulatory framework to get those products accepted. I think the U.S. has done quite well. If you went 3 years ago, those frameworks didn't, they existed for a metal implant. They didn't exist for something that resorbs or that has living cells. And I think the FDA has done really great. Matt DePrima, who runs the 3D printing part of it, has really clarified a path of how do you get those things in market. And U.S. is leading in that space. But I think globally, that's the one part. This is a totally new industry in a lot of white space where you can create a lot of value. So working together with industry, academia, and government to get these new classes of, in a multi-stakeholder approach, get these new classes of devices approved and eventually to make better patient outcomes is something where there could be great collaboration. And there's a great body of research now with 15 years of the technology at labs with development of different applications that it's getting ready to actually burst into the scenes. So it's exciting.
I think what you say, Rick, is really important, and the whole how do we make sure that the government and regulatory are open to the technology, and I think it comes back actually, Megan, something you were saying before about how do we make sure, because often regulatory is informed by the public. The government and the regulators are responding to what the public might feel, and I think there's something else that we need to do. How do we make this technology not seem scary? When you hear about creating ovaries and we're all scientists and we love to talk about it, but also as scientists, I think sometimes we scare people with the way we talk about our own science. So I think there's something about the partnership, and I know you and I talked about this, and you made a great point the other day about how do we make the narrative less scary, and I think that's an important partnership, because we're not always the best people, whether it's science, whether it's startup companies, whether it's companies like our company, we're not always the best people to tell the story.
I totally agree with that, and I think that was one of the huge missed opportunities during the pandemic, is really being open and vulnerable, right? Leadership through vulnerability, and not just being like, we're going to say this because maybe that's going to be the right thing now, but we're going to need to change it later, and not just being so open about like, look, now you need to do this. Later on, we're going to be switching policies because of this. And I think, to your point, when people feel like they don't understand something, they react and they run away from it, whether that's like a vaccine or that's GMO foods or that's, we've seen this play out so many times, right? So I think, we haven't done the best job in the past of being really transparent and open and not using jargon to try and explain things. And I think forums like the World Economic Forum are a great opportunity to start that transparency and trying to build those relationships where maybe it's the media, maybe it's entertainment, maybe there should be more shows that aren't necessarily people slamming on a keyboard and zooming in on the the perpetrator's face or whatever, but really talking about biology and the power of it and how it works in ways that they can understand and relate to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity here, because one of the side effects, so if you look at, you talked about reading and writing DNA, for example, right? The cost of read a human genome, first human genome, $100 million in 2000. You can buy a machine today, it's about the size of a washing machine, a company called Illumina, that's read a human genome for a couple $100. So we're talking about a million-fold cost reduction in reading DNA. Writing DNA has been falling also, and this is with essentially kind of automated and DNA synthesis technologies, also on a curve, not as fast as sequencing, but pretty good. Probably 100-fold over the last, call it 5-10 years. The editing of DNA, interesting. Total step change, right? Because what Trevor mentioned is we went out and discovered something better, right? Which is a bizarre phenomena to anybody that's like an engineer, right? Like if Intel's not going to walk out in a forest and find a 10 times faster chip next week, right? They're going to fight hard. Yeah, but that happens with these tools of biotechnology. We will also see these sort of step change improvements. So put those things together, and the cost to design organisms to program DNA has been falling very, very fast. It's allowing it to go into many new markets. That's why you're seeing these animal-free, these new applications in food. Companies on our platform are doing cosmetics, right? Things like skin and hair care with like human collagen, human keratin. You're seeing art projects, right? People there's a company doing a glowing petunia as an example, right? So I think that's going to change the dynamic with, in the conversation with the public as it gets more democratized, right? As people are able to do things that are more creative, that's a whole new way to talk about biotechnology. And look at computers. They were terrified. computers with giant mainframes. All they were doing was shooting missiles, right? And like today, right? Like we've developed this bizarrely, like loving relationship with our computers, right? And so that's to me is a process of democratization. I think that's coming with synthetic biology now.
And dropping faster than Moore's law to your computer.
It is, yeah.
Which I think a lot of people don't understand, that it's actually faster.
Yeah, it sneaks up on you. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I would love to turn to the audience to see if you have any particular questions. Otherwise, I have lots of questions for this crew.
Awesome.
Please, if you'd like to ask a question, please put it in the form of a question. I see one right over here.
Microphone coming.
Hi, thank you all for very interesting presentations, and each in your area you're doing something really innovative and inspiring. I had a discussion the other night here with someone about the rate of technological advancement in the world, and he put it that it all is down to the amount of craziness we have, and you need to allow for the crazy to kind of move forward at the fastest speed. What we were talking about is that there is such a need for our health to be better and to be improved, and we've made so much advancements in various areas, including in military, putting people into outer space, and it's kind of frustrating to see that we have this potential, but there is not as much, at least to me it sounds like not as much fast track. And what's your view on this? Is there enough of this crazy elements in the companies that you are fostering, and would you allow for more craziness? And do you think this could be a solution for both people already in the industry and in the society to embrace that we need to have this extra craziness to move forward?
Maybe I'll add that on. Maybe not just crazy, but bold, right? How do we be bold in setting the types of targets that we would need in order to get to what we think is the promise, right, of things that are more sustainable or new functions or have better access? So what's the mix of crazy and bold that you've managed to achieve, and what do we need?
I think this is just more about human psyche. We always overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term. And if I told you, try to predict in the future, are we really going to have another millionfold decrease in cost on something? You wouldn't think you would, and at least it's kind of hard to fathom that. But there's huge potential for this technology for us to, whether it's in synthetic biology or in biofabrication, combining these fields and putting engineered cells into a scaffold that then grows in. Does something specific. There's a lot of potential in this industry for huge growth, and real innovation should feel like magic, right? So, if you go back before the iPhone was launched and you were typing on a BlackBerry, you didn't think, and somebody told you, let's do it on a piece of glass, you'd think, oh no, I'm going to stick with this. But then when you see it, it clicks. And so, I think it's about entrepreneurship at the end of the day, and whether it's in academia or in small companies or in big companies, people trying something new that nobody else had done before. And I think humans are really good at that. We'll always surprise ourselves with wonderful things. So
yeah. Go ahead, please.
No. I think the only thing I would is doing something small and doing something big often is just as hard as each other. So you might as well do the thing that's hard, because it turns out, I think people really underestimate the opportunity cost of time. And really, that's one of the number one reasons why I think for everyone up here, really thinking about what's the most impactful thing that's unique that can be value add to the world, and not just doing an all-star. I think that's one of the things that frustrates me a bit about biotech in general sometimes, is you'll have 12 companies going after kind of the same thing sometimes. And I think that's where there's a lot of kind of untrod ground where if you really do swing big and you really want to take risk and really have technology that can actually solve that, there are huge opportunities to, maybe not be crazy, but take calculated risk.
Go please, Trish.
Oh, sorry.
No, please, no, insist.
I was just going to say, I love the question. It really creates a dilemma. Crazy or bold, it's the same kind of question. crazy or bold is never fast. I think that's the thing. And it needs the conditions, like a cell, it needs the conditions, crazy ideas or bold ideas, it needs the right conditions to grow. And often it's about time. And I think about, cultured meat. Who would have thought a few years ago that we could actually culture meat cells? But actually it comes back to, I still think we need to think with the end in mind, because actually culturing meat cells is now not the rate limiting. We can culture meat cells, but creating the scaffold around them so that they taste like a burger, putting the right flavors in, scaling all of that. So it just...
We can help you.
Yeah, there we go.
There it is.
We already have some partnerships
Solving
here.
problems.
But I think that's the thing. We're all of us are all working on crazy ideas today. We're working in DSM. We're investing in cultured meat, and we're trying to work out the growth factors to help it be scaled. So we're all working on the crazy things, but we have to keep the end in mind, how it's going to be used, so that we can really, the fun part of our jobs is really getting an innovation to the market and somebody using it and benefiting from it.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna finally add my 2 cents here.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's great. So I couldn't agree more. Since it is the World Economic Forum, make a more general comment. So I think there's a lesson in the mRNA vaccines, and mRNA vaccines are heroic human achievement. One part of it sort of like disappoints me about the species. So, if you walked in and asked any of the great, vaccine folks about how long this was going to take, it was going to be 5 years to get a vaccine. And under the gun of a crisis, we were able to coordinate beyond like any individual company and do it in a year, right? And there must be like 1,000 other problems that are exactly like that, and we're just not coordinating, right? Like, it's easy to be crazy as a single company. It's straightforward, right? You go down the list and we got Steve Jobs, blah blah blah. The miss is, how do we do it as a species, right? Like, how do we go after big things, collectively? Because it turns out I don't think it's actually that hard, right? Like it's the coordination that's hard. Yeah. And so we only do it under the barrel of a gun, right? And that's a disappointment.
Let's see, we have a few more questions. I think we'll try and get in 2 more right over here. Oh, we're over here to start, and then over here after.
No, this is great. I would love for somebody from the panel to talk about, we're going in such an amazing speed where the understanding of the implications of a lot of this work is also not going at the pace of a lot of the production, because the amount of funding going into the companies is not as much as funding into the background research. So can you talk about the unintended consequences as well as the needed guardrails so that we are not breaking things in ways that we may not be able to fix later on?
You want me to go? That's the hard question. I can go first. I think it's a core question, right? And I think if you look at the big tech platforms, there's a lot of lessons there. I think in fundamentally having an attitude of, hey, at the end of the day, I'm building a platform. It's not my responsibility for the second order effects of that platform. And I think that was sort of ensconced. That was it's almost like an engineer's view of the world or something. So I honestly think the very first step is just saying, as we're building these powerful technology platforms, we have to care, how they're used, right? And so I think it starts with the people who are doing the building, and then it's sort of like, then what, right? But I think there's been some good basis in synthetic biology, I think, because of kind of how the field got going, where those conversations did get started early. But I think this is critical. I mean, and I don't think there's an easy answer for it. I think it has a lot to do with getting people building the technology who come from communities that could be negatively impacted by it, so that they're at the table from the beginning, right? And to me, that's one of the approaches we're taking at Ginkgo. But it's not an easy problem. But I do think, in particular with this technology, we need to care. The only other thing I will say, though, to put a pitch in, that you also have to ask the opportunity cost of not deploying it. And we've been talking a lot about net zero at this meeting. Like, biomanufacturing should be net negative. In other words, it should be a sink for carbon if done correctly, right? And so, that's we have nothing else like that in the next 5 years. What else is going to operate at scale? And if you look at biology on the planet, it is atmospheric carbon capture. It does it. And so, we need faster growing trees, right? We need soil carbon capture. If we need a hack for partnerships, we need a carbon market, so farmers can get paid for doing that. And all of that is going to be regulatory crazy, right? Like it's going to be moving fast into new areas, but like to me, it's another mRNA vaccine, right? Like, oh, the regulation alone couldn't get done in a year. Yes, it can. Right, if the problem is sufficient. So I think it's a right question to ask. But I do think this technology's got a lot of good to do coming up.
CRISPR is an obvious test case of this. Let's be real. And I think you're exactly right? So like the tech platforms, they basically absolve themselves of all responsibility. I think biotech should not do that. I don't think that's worked out great for society, as it turns out. But I also think we don't want to go too far the other direction and be like, okay, the people in this room are going to decide something about like, oh, this is the best use of the technology, right? I think I really, really agree with you that you have to have like the patients, like the providers, like society in general, I don't know, community leaders, religious leaders. I think there's a lot of people that would have a lot of great input on this, but the only way you're ever going to have an intelligent conversation about that is if you're able to actually explain to them and help them understand like what is the actual implication of the technology. Because a lot of times people will come up and be like, oh, like, is CRISPR going to do this? No, like that's actually, there are like so many important topics to talk about in all the technologies we work with, but often it's like we're talking about maybe the ones that we'll talk about, in 10 years or, whatever the right timing is. But there's so many different things where we need to do a better job of educating people about like what are the real issues today so we can start tackling these one at a time and really have a conversation that's ongoing, because you're not going to have one, committee, even here, so apologies, and just come up with the right framework, right? This has got to be like a conversation that's going on for the rest of humanity's existence, and that's something that we just don't have any of the structures in place, at least not with the right people in the room.
I think outside of the body, you need, and maybe the forum's a great place, is a place where you bring a lot of different stakeholders together. When you go into the body, besides groups like this, you've got the regulatory frameworks, and there's processes, there's GMP for the manufacturing to ensure that the products are going to be produced accurately and efficiently and with high quality, and that they're reproducible, that the results are statistically significant, and all of that. So the good news is that there's a lot of work that's been done there, and then there's work that's been done in maturing these technologies over, 3D printing is not new. What's new is that now it's much faster, it's higher throughput, it can do multiple materials, it can do biological components, and so, or components that turn into tissue. And so this is where I think we're going to a brave new world of possibilities, and I think that's very exciting. But I think we're like here in a moment similar to where Genentech was in the 70s.
Yeah,
and I think we have a huge opportunity ahead of us to make people's lives better.
Great. Well, we'll try and get one more question in from the audience.
Thank you very much. I think it's fantastic that we are recreating Nature 2.0 somehow, but and it's going extremely fast, as you say. When the internet came in place, or the platforms came in place, we started speaking about cybersecurity X years ago. When do you see that we had to start to speak about biosecurity on the board level in the years to come?
Now.
No.
There.
Yeah.
Yesterday. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion. I very much agree. We need to be thinking about all of these different aspects and how we integrate them in, how we think about sustainability, how we think about security, how we think about inclusiveness. And so just to, in the last minute of our panel here, I would like to give you each the chance to tell me, right, what's your one priority? What's your one wish? What do you want everybody here to know? And then is there one partnership that you think is going to be really important to get there? Who wants to start?
Maybe in the interest of time, I'll say quickly. I think for me, it's about really starting with the end in mind. And with that, and I'll pick up on the question about unintended consequences, that means that it's a multi-stakeholder technology adoption journey. And I think we should think about it now and start with the end in mind, which including things like biosecurity in our thinking.
Yeah, for me, is really seeing the first biofabricated devices that really start to go into humans and make people's lives better. And this is in the process of happening now, not just in an assay to test a drug, but actually in devices that go into people. And I'm very excited about what this decade is going to bring for all of us, because I think there's a huge opportunity to make people's lives better.
I'll highlight the net zero. I think having the ability to basically monitor that. So like have a system where someone's validating that you're capturing, and then a means to get paid. That's going to be a cross private-public interaction, and you do it, and it'll rip. And so I think there's a big opportunity there.
Yeah, and I think really for us, it's delivering on the promise, right? So, we've heard about technologies like CRISPR, and I think what's really exciting is we're starting to actually see the fruits of that labor, whether that's in therapeutics. And, at Mammoth, we're really working on doing things like in vivo permanent cures and accessible diagnostics that are really accurate. And like actually starting to see that out in the wild, that's, I think, the #1 thing, and that'll go along with education as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining us here today. Clearly, there's a lot of work to do, but there's also a great amount of potential and some new partnerships that can be formed through the forum here that we've already started. So thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your day and your time in office.